Dylan, what I'd like to ask you to do is just to say for people, because I think what you're about to say is representative of how people respond to Week 9 in ModPo, even people who've been doing it for years, Dylan. They come upon this stuff, and at first they think, ew, why wouldn't these people just write their poems? Why do they have to rewrite somebody else's? Or why do they have to be unoriginal? And why do they have to copy someone else? And why do we have to have echoes of other people? You know, what happened to the idea of the poet, you know, in the garret all alone writing what is in their mind? Would you just sort of describe how you've come to appreciate this stuff and why?
I think after reading each one of these poems, I had a moment where I was like, what did I just read? And after thinking about it and like having the chance to sit with it for a few days, I just like appreciate this week a lot because there's such there's two facets of this for me, which one of them is just thinking about this like randomization of these poems and just the aleatory nature, and like thinking about that and just how it mimics how much our lives just in general are determined by chance and happen completely based on like a series of choices that could have gone either way, and we make so many connections through that, and just our lives just kind of happen that way and they fall into place a lot of the time. And I think also going back to that, like that sense of we make a lot of these like friendships and relationships, and our family, like our lineage too, happens through like a series of chances and choices that happen. And just the fact that we can like interact with other people through this like all of this chance that's happening around us is, I don't know, there's something really beautiful about that to me. And then kind of going back to what you were saying, Al, about the kind of the lonely poet and writing by oneself. I think there's like an image of the poet that happens a lot where it's like very much based on a poet sitting at like their desk and writing alone and waiting to present this to the world. But that's not really how poetry works a lot of the time. Like going to this week, I mean, a lot of the poems were written because writers took other things that other writers had written and were able to make something new out of that, and that is the art. But also just the relationship between the poet and the reader, and how the poet isn't the only creator in that sense, because the reader is also working in a creative way and making meaning out of the poem, and the reader themselves becomes the artist in a way, and just all of the ways that can happen, I think is really beautiful. So I
Snaps for Dylan. That was just such a great summary, and pass that along to Julia. And I also think there's something, the word democratic starts to feel right, even though we think of these, you know, Jackson McClough is thought of as a avant-garde elite, you know, inaccessible, blah, blah, blah. That's a judgment made probably on the basis of his character and apparent remoteness, neither of which, you know, is true. And so basically you're saying what's the best way we can do to create readership as participatory in the meaning making, and that is a democratic gesture. And it's been, in the last couple of weeks, we've been heading toward that as Lynn Haginian creates a life that requires you to help her make meaning of her own life. You begin to be a member of that community of her girlhood to womanhood or whatever it is. And so this becomes generative, it becomes generous, rather than weird and remote. And that's hard to come to if you're new to this stuff. It would be one thing for people to say, yeah, well, in dance it requires, choreography requires 20 or 15 people. Making a film requires a whole bunch of people. Putting on a play requires a whole bunch of people. Often plastic and visual art requires a bunch of people. Pretty much all the arts, music, composition, symphonic art, it all requires a bunch of people. Why is poetry supposed to be the one art where it's just one person? That's wrong. And it turns out not to be true. As people who are members of the poetry community know, that at its best it is constantly circulating and informing each other. Thank you, Dylan.